Scott, welcome to 10% True. Thanks for joining us on the channel.
Great to be here, Steve.
But we're going to talk today about your time flying the F-4G and specifically your experiences as an F-4G pilot flying in Operation Desert Storm. I've had the good fortune of interviewing Spike Benishek, and we've talked to him on the channel about his time flying the F-4G in Desert Storm. I've also interviewed Starbaby Pachuca, who didn't fly in Desert Storm, but was an EWO who came after Desert Storm, and it's been fantastic talking to him. But I'm going to treat this interview as a blank slate. I'm going to go into it with my eyes open with no expectations as to what you're going to talk about. And it doesn't matter to me if there's some overlap in between what you talk about and what other guests have talked about in the past. I'm just excited to hear your story. So with that introduction made, and maybe I can tease a little bit and say everyone will be looking at your background, seeing the F-117 and the F-15C up there. So everyone will be looking at that and figuring that you have flown other types, and maybe you're currently working for the weapons school, so you have some restrictions on what you can talk about, but maybe when you retire, we'll come back and cover those aircraft types too.
Well, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so tell us, how did you get to the F-4G then? What was your route into the cockpit? And maybe if you want, tell us a bit about what your inspiration was to become a pilot in the Air Force to begin with.
Yeah, apparently my mother told me this story, but when I was being very small, 2-3 years old, someone had given me a gift of a small bag of little plastic airplanes, and apparently I lugged that around for a long time. And anytime I would see like an airplane fly over or a contrail, I'd point to it and whatever I was saying in my babble. And then and she said that she thought that was odd, but that was just kind of what I did as a kid. And as I got older, I wanted to fly. Honestly, I thought it would be cool to be a pilot. I never imagined a military pilot. And my early days, I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And so I knew what I wanted to do. And then eventually some friends that kind of believed in me more, I think, than I believed in myself, was able to, show me how to get into Air Force ROTC. And did that. I graduated from University of Memphis and got my commission that way. And during that time, began flying with some friends and with instructors as part of the program, and discovered I had kind of a knack for it, which was a good thing. So that through ROTC, pilot training, and of course the day you show up there, everybody look around the room. In those days we had 60 people in class, and I went down. I was at Laughlin Air Force Base, and you look around the room and there's 60 people, and all but a few people are saying, yeah, I want fighters, I'll get fighters, knowing that that's only the top 10% of the class. And that was quickly deflated when the wing commander walked in and got up there to introduce himself and meet the new class, and told us, legitimately just said, look left and right, they won't be here when you graduate. They're going to wash back or wash out. And in those days, they had about this was the mid 80s. I think the washout rate was somewhere around 40%. So because they could afford to burn through bodies, so to speak, because they had I think we had 6 or 7 active pilot training bases, and it was the end of the Reagan years and all that. So, or it was the Reagan years. So anyway, I was fortunate enough to graduate high enough in the class to get a straight F-4E Phantom, and went to training for that. My first assignment was Moody Air Force Base as a lieutenant. I was only there for just under a year and a half as the base was converting to F-16s, and the new guys weren't. So we showed up with 3 crews from my class and 1 for each squadron. And, they told us right off the bat, you lieutenant pilot guys are not converting, so not a big deal. I was happy to be flying as a fighter at that point, and had a couple of good experiences that first assignment. As we mentioned earlier, I got a chance to do constant peg as a lieutenant, and that was an amazing opportunity. And a couple other small things. Again, it was a very short assignment. But my next assignment from there was F-4Gs to George Air Force Base, and that's out here in Victorville, California. And showed up, and I was just a straight F-4E guy. And in those days, we had the F-4E, F-4G hunter-killer mix. That was a carryover tactics-wise from Vietnam, when the Weasel, which had different airframes in Vietnam, but when the Weasel would find the sites, shoot a Shrike missile at it, which also had a white phosphorus round in it, soon as if it hit the radar, then that would mark the target for all the killers who were out there laying low and would pop up and hit them with hard ordnance. So the hunter-killer concept carried forward. It allows you to have a smaller fleet of G models, converted airplanes, and still have more firepower as you go into the fight. So I showed up there as an E guy, a straight E guy, flew hunter-killer for probably not even a year. And they go, okay, it's time. And they sent me to the 562nd, which is the jet in your background there, the training squadron, and got Geaseled, as we used to say. So got Geaseled, went back, and then started my upgrades from there. So that's kind of in short. I mean, it really was my second jet to fly, and it was a separate qualification, which is why you went to the 562nd. For both front and back seat, it was a separate qual, and you logged the hours differently because the jets were physically the same. I mean, they flew exactly the same, but the cockpit configuration and crew coordination and everything else was dramatically different. And that was kind of, I think, part of the big reason for the school, especially front seaters. We were I'd say we were interchangeable. The jet was only as good as the EWO. So if your EWO was awesome, then you were having an awesome day. If your EWO was less than awesome, you were right there with them, because there wasn't a lot you could do in the front seat to change what was happening in the back seat, except encouragement and not hitting the ground while you're trying to work together as a team. It was a great assignment. I mean, it was my first of two Weasel assignments, but it was just being a kid, young captain flying F4s over the deserts of California and Nevada. I had 100. We were what they call 100-foot qual. So you would step down to be qualified to fly the jet, hand fly the jet at 100 feet AGL, and 500 plus knots. So we planned to live low. Those are the days of the Fulda Gap, and kind of sound familiar, sadly, right now, with the Warsaw Pact wall. So we planned to live low, pop up to kill things, but that's how we planned to survive. We had watched the Israelis, being whacked by the SA-6 during, I think it was the 7-day war. But everybody was kind of stunned at how good the SA-6 was in those days, and also the SA-3, I believe. So we saw how they survived, and they survived in the weeks. So I think we as an Air Force adopted that model. So you would show up as a new guy and then get stepped down from 500 to 300 to 100. And we did that over about a 6-month period so you wouldn't kill yourself. What we call time to die slides, when you're turning a jet at low altitude. If you overbank by a couple of degrees at the wrong time, you've got probably 5 to 7 seconds before you're eating rock. So we trained a lot down there, and got very comfortable down there. But so that was kind of the path to the G. That was it. That was my first assignment. Was awesome. So I was in the 563rd for a bit, for 2 years, and then on the way to the Philippines, they closed the 563rd, moved the jets around, and flew with the 561st for a bit, which is the Yellowtails right there at George as well. So flew with them for probably 6 months, and then went to the Philippines to the Nania Tactical Fighter Squadron, which is the Diceman, and flew there for 2.5 years before coming home. And it was while I was at Clark with the 90th, during Desert Shield, we were put on notice that they anticipated a really high loss rate of weasels, like they'd seen in Vietnam. For the first couple of nights of Desert Storm, they anticipated high loss rates. I don't know if you've ever seen a map of Baghdad with all the SA-2s and SA-3s and everything else they had. It kind of looked like the Ring of Death, and it was more heavily defended than anything that was even in Vietnam at the time. So we were kind of anticipating some pretty high loss rates of both airframes and aircrew. So we were put on notice to have 6 jets and 6 crews ready as attrition replacements. And so I was one of the 6 crews. There's a picture I sent you. You'll see we had 12 of us. 6 front seaters, 6 back seaters. All the front seaters were instructors and 4-ship flight leads. and the backseaters were all IEWOs, instructor EWOs. We needed to be interchangeable and be there on tap. So we wound up deploying from the Philippines to the AOR, via a very crazy carrier, DC-8 carrier, which we thought we were going to die on before we got to go to war, but we survived. It was not a pleasant trip, but we did wound up in. But go ahead.
I was going to say, before you carry on and get to the bit where you actually arrive in theatre, can I just take you back?
Yeah.
And ask a couple of questions around some of the things you've talked about then. So I suppose the first thing I wanted to understand was, having gone straight from pilot training to the F-4E, what you felt about the aeroplane. I think anybody who's listening to this will understand the F-4 has, there's a hard wing, there's a slatted wing. The slatted wing helps to address some of the shortfalls in performance in terms of turning performance, that it has an adverse yaw problem, or it has an adverse yaw characteristic, let's say. So you have to be careful about how you handle the aeroplane with the aileron when you're higher angles attack. I just wondered whether or not it was an easy aeroplane for you to transition to, and whether you enjoyed flying it. That was going to be my initial question.
Sure, you bet. They had at the time when I went through pilot training, we had the slatted E course you would go through, or you would go through the hard wing C course, which they taught down at MacDill at the time. They had one or two squadrons there, but there was still a lot of C and Ds, in the guard and they weren't in the active inventory, but they were in the guard. But that was still a school, and you could get routed through MacDill. And then back out to George for a slatted E top off, which I know a bunch of guys that did that. A couple of good friends did that. And we did fly differently. The hard wing, I'm told, I never flew one. That's good or bad. You put the stick in one position in a hard turn and use the rudders to move the nose around, because you didn't want to be putting aileron into a hard wing in a turn where you'll be off to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride pretty quickly. The jet was very unforgiving, and you'd be off in some type of some degree of departed flight pretty quickly. You didn't handle the jet well. The E was more forgiving that way, and I'm glad. But also your piece of S curves, your energy bleed curves, the jet would bleed energy faster than a hard wing C. Again, I've never flown one. I was just always told by the old guys it would. But you had a pretty decent energy burn rate with those big. We called them leading edge speed brakes. Once those suckers would deploy, and they would deploy on AOA, on the aircraft, they would automatically deploy when the jet thought they would need it. And that could be. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember ever, except for advanced handling rides when you wanted to feel them coming out. I don't remember ever feeling them come out. When you're maneuvering the jet, it was just kind of part of how the jet felt when you flew it. I remember the very first time I flew it, my very first ride, and I get airborne and the gear up. And one of the first things I remember thinking was, wow, this pitch sensitivity reminded me of a T-38, but I'd just flown those. And I was really surprised at how pitch sensitive it was, to be such a big airplane and everything else. And I immediately just kind of fell into it. A lot of people refer to the cockpit as agricultural. Everything is big gauges. Landing gear handle, really long, handle with a big wheel on the end, so you wouldn't forget that's a landing gear. There was the ergonomic stuff on it was pretty caveman. I'm just going to say it was pretty cool. If you ever looked at a cockpit of an A4 Skyhawk, McDonnell Douglas product, and look at the cockpit of an F4 McDonnell Douglas product, you would see they were identical, except that extra row of engine instruments in it. It was identical. I mean, at least the presentation, the dashboard, everything there was, it was identical. It was called a fourth gen fighter, third or fourth gen, probably fourth gen fighter. It was great to fly. Rugged, would beat the hell out of you down low altitude if you were, had turbulence or running across a desert, on a heated desert. It just beat the hell out of you. The wing loading was really high, and you just get the crap beat out of you. But it was all part of it. She was very steady, very smooth. If you flew her well, you really knew how to get what you wanted out of her turn wise and everything else. look at your Visa, VMAX, and be able to make the jet turn like you want. It was great to fly. I had some buddies who loved the jet and some guys who couldn't wait to get to another jet. I love flying it. Flew it for about, I think that's right at 7 years, first 7 years of my career. All I flew, just E's and G's.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but if you'd like to support the channel, please do visit 10percenttrue.com and take a look at my store. You can buy polo shirts, t-shirts, stickers, patches, and even my books. And speaking of which, if you're listening to the podcast, this won't make sense, but if you're watching it, then great. The one that's being played in the background at the moment is my new book, F-15E Strike Eagle, Be Afraid of the Dark, Part 1. It's a glorious coffee table book, been professionally laid out and put together, tells the story of the Strike Eagle from 1984 to 2002. I'm taking pre-orders for it now. If you're interested in it, if you're thinking that might make a nice present for somebody, please do go ahead, visit 10percenttrue.com. Place an order. Thank you.
Tell us about that pairing, that E and G pairing then for the Hunter-Killer Wild Weasel mission. It is interesting because I have had Spike on. He's talked about F-4G a lot and Starbaby Petruka, who's the EWO, and we've also had T-Bear, and I've had E.T. Johnston and a bunch of wild weasels, really very experienced wild weasels. And I've never really asked the question about the pairing of the G model and the E model. How did that work? Were you just sort of like a bomb or a missile truck in the E model? You just pointed your nose and fired when you were told to? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we would carry, depending on the whether they had tanks or not, we would routinely carry two strikes. We call it -9 and -10. So it was the AGM-45 strike. And there was different variants. Each version, each dash, we used to call it, covered a frequency band, a specific frequency band. And in the early days, I actually shot strikes that were Vietnam strikes, just for training. Yeah, no, they were dated like 1967 or whatever the date was. Might have been later, like 69 or 70. But nonetheless, we had a bunch of -3s, I think it was -3s, that we had at George at one point. We were trying to get rid of them. So we set up a big training day. Because, a strike's a strike's a strike. When you physically look at it, the way you shoot it, it all behaves the same. But we would carry, we used to say -9 and -10, carry one of each of those on stations. And so we carry two strikes, and then we would carry a hard killer, killing ordnance if that was what we were doing that day. It could be anything from Mark 82, just straight Mark 82s, Mark 84s, which we would only carry two of those. Well, actually, yeah, two of those on our hard points. But our job as an E-model guy was to keep everybody's six clear. Your job is, unless you're low altitude, is make sure everybody's clear of their six, and because the other guys are doing the job as well, and then maintain formation with your lead. Those are your two big things. We had some tactics where we could do calm out, where we'd wing rock, going inbound to a target, wing rock, and lead would cut across your nose, and that was your pull. That was your signal to, once he's at 90 degrees, you pull your nose up 45 degrees and pickle off your strike, because they put you into the basket so that your strike would go up and over, open its eyes, and luck, hopefully, Lady Luck would see the emitter, and then would track in on it. Because we would have just real rudimentary information on our raw gear on what we were seeing in front of us, which usually matched up with the G model, no problem, but it wasn't as accurate as the G model. And so you go, okay, if they even called like working and wherever our code word that day might have been for an SE2, you knew what you were doing. And then at some point we'd see a big wing flash and pull into the target. You would keep your formation with them, line up, and then either they would shoot, or if they wanted you to shoot, then they would wing rock again, pull in front of you, and then you would pop up, shoot your missile, and then roll back into formation. And if you really did it well, you never really lost line of breast too bad. But it took a while. It took a long time as a young guy to get that timing down. But that was the stuff. We could carry more missiles to the fight that way, because the G would carry two harms, and we would carry two strikes. If that's what we were doing that day. If we were going for hard kills, then the ordnance would not be strikes. It would be your Mark series weapons. We used to even carry AGM-65 Mavericks, double IR Mavericks, things like that. So we trained for that as well. And and if you knew, if you were, say, we used to say, if we're bringing the Shrikes out, the war has gone to a different place, and we expected high loss rates then at that point. But it was our job as an E-model guy. Also, everybody carried AIM-7s. We would try to carry AIM-9s on the E as well. And more, I don't say we're self-protecting air to air, but it gave us an ability to, we had a gun in the E-model. If you were going to try and gun somebody in that era, it was going to be sporty as well. But we trained to it, with dissimilar air. So our job was a combination of, just like you said, being a dump truck, the ordnance of the day, and kind of adding a defensive flavor to our formation as well. And then we had a magic word that we had come up with in the 563rd to a friend of mine who was part of the PEF, who has since left this world. He's Paul Dowden, went by Data. He came up with this. Him and our flight commander named Digger Odell, who's out here in Henderson. They used the word Arizona, the term Arizona. So when all your ordnance was shot, your Weasel ordnance was shot or dropped, then you would come up and say Michelob 4-1's Arizona, meaning that we had the ability to swing air to air at that point, and would go out and in training we had no problem going out looking for bad guys because it was fun to go find them and tangle with them. Desert Storm, not the case. Everybody had we all carried air to air missiles, but it was purely defensive. We were on no uncertain terms told not to, if there was, a bad guy air around, let the Eagles deal with it. That's what they were there for. We were what is the word I'm looking for? We were a high value asset, and there weren't that many of us comparative to the other aircraft in theater. So the rule was, unless you're backed into a corner or someone just pops up off an airfield out of the blue, if you have time, get the hell out of there. And we did. I mean, we would love to have had an air-to-air kill off of a Weasel. That would have been beyond cool. But you would have had some explaining to do as well. Granted, you come home with a kill. So it's like you only kick you in the ears, so many times before they have to congratulate you. But I think there was maybe one opportunity there. Somebody got close one time, but anyway. So I know I kind of, you'll notice I rabbit hole, and people who know me know I rabbit hole. So
okay, you rabbit hole to your heart's content. I'll pull you back out when you stop talking. So that's fine.
Sure.
So let me ask then around the low level piece. The two things sort of came to my mind when you were talking about being down at 100 feet. One is what your night capability was, because you're obviously not going to be hooning around the countryside in Eastern Europe or Central Europe even, or even Western Europe at 100 feet. Maybe in California you can do it sort of over the desert plains, but obviously not in the mountains. But you're still not going to be doing that at night. But also, sort of what the implications of flying that low were tactically. So, I guess if you're sort of trundling around with all these sensors in the aeroplane sniffing the trons and you're at medium altitude, which is I think what you did at Desert Storm, and you'll tell us about that in a minute, then obviously you're going to be sucking all this up and you'll have all this information. And I suppose there are some disadvantages to that, but overall there's a big advantage to it. You're down at 100 feet and you're masking. What exactly are you going to pick up, and how much time are you going to have to react to it? So there's two questions there. Okay, you flew low level during the day, great, but what about at night or in the weather that you get in Central Europe? And then two, what are the disadvantages or advantages of being at low level?
No, that's a good question. No, we if it was weather, the assumption was we'd be up 1,000+ feet, which would give you better line of sight to a threat. Obviously, we would ingress at low altitude. And once you were in the target area, and that could be within X miles from the threat, it was threat dependent. If you knew what was out there, you would pop up to sniff, as you see, to pick up the try, start to try to do some cuts and get the triangulation going. But at night, no, we were up at medium altitude. The community knew that, and we knew it was harder to train for the low altitude day step. We knew if we were flying in the daytime, you were going to be subject to a lot of other threats besides just SAMs, so AAA. And at high altitude, with a decreased line of sight, you got a chance of a radar tracking you, or even somebody getting lucky. I mean, look at 8th Air Force, over Europe. I mean, shooting, 88s, at airplanes at, 20, 25,000 feet above you and still knocking them down. So if you could generate a very aggressive line of sight with the shooter, then it makes it more difficult for even a mechanical tracking system to track you. Now, this was, of course, the 80s and the 90s. Today, the AAA systems are just insane. If you're down at low altitude, you're just making it harder for you to eject, I think, personally. But you have to check with the Ukrainians. I think they've, if you've seen any of their videos of how they survive, they're below 100 feet. They're running around really, really low. But no, it's so at night we would be up at medium altitude. And one of the things that was interesting and different from being at George, George was, we knew our AOR was going to be CENTAF, the Southwest Asia AOR, and also we would be supplementing the European squadrons as well, if especially the Fulda Gap and all that, if the war ever kicked off. So we trained kind of like all the other Weasels out there. Nighttime we'd be at medium altitude, use the longer standoff ranges and be more survivable, that kind of thing. Absolutely, and had many. We always knew what our minimum altitude was if we had to maneuver aggressively to defend ourselves. And so that was it. Was day weaseling, night weaseling. The difference of altitude awareness was definitely there, and how we kind of trained for that. When I went to Clark Air Force Base, or Clark Air Base in the Philippines, the 90 Attack Fighter Squadron, the PACAF Weasels, we used to PACAF Pirates, used to call us. The PACAF Weasels, our AOR was Southeast Asia, and primarily was going to be the Korean Peninsula. So we trained knowing that the majority of our sorties in those days were going to be at night. There were day sorties scheduled and everything else, but we knew the majority of our squadron, the majority of our mission would be at night. So unlike the other Weasel squadrons, we had a very specific night checkout program, very altitude aware. But, we trained to do the full envelope of defensive maneuvers at night. And as a front seater, you did that almost as an instrument type thing. And it's very disorienting. So we used to train, especially a night top off, we called it. It was a pretty aggressive training in that you flew with an instructor, primarily flew in ease if we could, just so the instructor could see forward. And you practice doing, different, we call it orthogonal rolls and other types of defensive maneuvers that you would employ if you were shot at by a SAM. And we start off easy with a really high deck, 10,000 feet, being the back of the hard deck, and go up and maneuver, do, an orthogonal roll or a barrel roll, really tight barrel rolls, vertical up and down maneuvering, trying to be survivable there with the missiles. So we would train that way. And then it could be very disorienting. And you had to get past that. That was just part of it. So we trained to actually fight at night. We were also night weasels. They even considered us night weasels. Within our community, we were night weasels. So yeah, that definitely changed things. We still flew our share of low altitude. Don't get me wrong. It was just, you're too much of a kid, too much of an adrenaline junkie not to. But we knew that when the war kicked off in our AOR, we were going to be medium to high altitude, 15 to 25,000 feet, and we were going to have to just deal with it at night. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, what does it mean then in terms of your activities in the front of the airplane as a pilot? So if you're flying at night, I guess during the day you're doing a visual lookout thing, aren't you? So what are you doing at night then in the front?
At night, definitely. The big thing is making sure you keep the sunny side up. You make sure you're not, because especially night, like over the ocean, like we would fly over out in Clark, Philippines, or when we flew in Desert Storm, there's no lighting on the ground. There's nothing out there. So you can be getting up and black is up, black is down you have to maintain situational awareness of what the aircraft's doing. I mean, pretty much all the time. It doesn't afford you a lot of times if you're looking around, just, kind of, I want to call it daydreaming, but not like, physically you're flying the jet and it's your job to check around. At night, we would fly separate. We would do in trail or altitude offsets because we didn't have NVGs in those days. So we would do deconfliction with our formation so we wouldn't run into each other, but we'd still be together and could provide a tactical support from each other. My job up front was, you said to maintain, keep the airplane, right side up, know where we're going. And then while the EWO is doing his thing in the pit, and if you flew with each other long enough, and we did, crew together, you would know when they were busy because they get quiet, or some of the guys would just constantly. Had some guys who would talk themselves through their job, which was a little bit comforting. Okay, I'm working the two, here and talking to themselves, which is good. I like audible, what's going on. And some guys would just get really quiet and they'd be really focused on it. Just depends who you flew with. You knew what their habits were. But my job when they were busy doing their job was to make sure that, I'm looking around, scanning the horizon for missile shots, trying to keep track of the other airplane if I physically can. And then, keeping SA on where we are with the formation with regard to like the strikers we're protecting. Those are the kind of things we would do up front at medium to high altitude. And I'll be honest with you, in the G model, you really were kind of a stick actuator. And also the thing I thought, defensive maneuvering. But no kidding though, if we weren't being shot at, my job to station keep, or lead the formation and get us in the target area. But the actual, the business end of the Geaseled, the G model, was the guy in the pit. And so my EWO's out there doing his thing, and it's my job to keep him oriented, like he wants to the threats, and whether he wants me to beam him or turn hot. And within the cockpit, most guys had their own. If you crew together, kind of knew what they meant. Turn inbound or turn hot or whatever that particular dude was going to say to you. You knew what that meant. So yeah, but I was really honestly, at that point, especially at night, kind of a stick actuator. Getting the jet to a position where the EWO can do it. And then between the crews, it was different. The guy I crewed with during Storm was Gene Peterson, went by Gino, and also Soju. There was another call sign of it. But Gino, very specifically, we talked about it, and he had the hammer to actually pickle off the harms when they were ready to come off the jet. Because I'm busy trying to tell them, look, I'll be flying. I'm going to keep us safe. Just please let me know when we're going to shoot a harm because they're incredibly bright at night. And they sound like a freight train when they come off the plane. They're really loud. But that was it. Crew coordination when he's going to shoot, so I could look away. Well, at least close my eyes for a second so I didn't get that flash blindness. And that works until the very first time you have to do it, and then with all the energy. Yeah. So yeah. Then you have to kind of fly with, like someone flashed a flashlight in your face for 2 or 3 minutes while you're going, okay, this looks right, this feels right. But yeah, that's it. So, the other pilots will probably tell you differently, but I viewed my role that way in the Weasel. At night, daytime, different ballgame. I was defensively oriented, and if I'm down at 100 feet, or even, if I'm at low altitude period, you're looking 10 to 2. You're flying the jet, you're focused here and keeping you out of the rocks and looking what we used to call a 20 or 30-second rock that you could put between you and a shooter if you could find one. And again, the mountains of California, it's pretty straightforward. You could probably find something. But we also knew, depending on where you were in Europe, you might not have that option. So it could also mean settling down to 50 feet and just hoping that the prox fuse on the weapon is being shot at you doesn't function on you as you're down there, skimming the treetops, which I believe is how our friends, the Ukrainians, are even still breathing air, at least the dudes that are flying right now. But they're just living in the low and hoping that sometimes will, work for you. But living in the low limits what you can do for maneuverability as well. Especially if you're you can't outmaneuver a SAM at low altitude. Either you're using the altitude to your advantage, or you climb up to maneuver, and that's probably not a good idea either. So it's a rock and a hard place, no pun intended.
How capable? I mean, if we talk about some older systems, SA6, SA8, how capable were those systems at low level? Were they likely to fuse off of the ground rather than you if you were at 50 feet?
Somebody, there's a I want to call it, it's converse that the older the system, if you look at okay, say that, and then you look at the S-400 and go, wow, that's a big missile.
Yeah.
It's a big missile, but the warhead is actually, I don't think, that big, and we'll just leave it at that. But because the guidance system, so the older systems had a really the guidance system on them could only get the missile so close to you, and there you had that within that track cell, that bubble around you. The accuracy of the radar was only that amount. I call it X. So within X, if that were the case, the system was designed to have a proximity fuse that would be a little bit greater than X, so that they could still see you and prox off you, in theory. And that's kind of how they did it. And they also had a bigger warhead. The SA2 has a monster warhead. And again, it's to offset the fact that the radar can't, the precision of the radar, the explosive and everything else offsets those two things, and they work together. Low altitude allowed you to get down inside that fuse proximity in that area, and you're hoping again to fool the missile and have it prox off the ground or some surrounding thing, and not off of you. No guarantee it wouldn't be on you, but the idea was to make it harder in the ground clutter for the missile to physically see you with its proximity fuse. But they were good. I mean, they were. They worked well. I mean, the Israelis, they found out, we all found out the hard way, when they got their force chewed up a little bit by SA6s in their war. I'm going to be doubtful on who they were fighting that time. I'm not going to say. I don't want to piss off some country.
I think it was the Egyptians.
They were fighting. Was it?
Wasn't it the Egyptians?
I think it was the Egyptians. I was pretty sure it was the Egyptians. I just wasn't sure. But everybody got surprised. It wasn't just the Israelis. Everybody in the world went, "Oh, that was watching an Israeli F-4 take it in the teeth down at low altitude and still get whacked." That was a big eye opener for all of us out there, especially Weasels. And so we have it's a combination of jamming, chaff, and altitude. And then again, the maneuvering is minimal at that point. You're just hunkering down if you're getting shot at, and you're hoping for the best. The Israelis didn't know that when it first happened. It was like they were caught short too, and not understanding what they were seeing. They figured it out pretty quick, but that kind of played a lot into our Weasel tactics, especially your mobile threats. We knew that you could just drive over the top of a mobile threat. We call them sandbush, where they, if the bad guys were smart enough, they give you some, strategic things over here to look at, your 2s and 3s and things like that. And hopefully you would drive in there to go after them. And all of a sudden there's an SA8 underneath you and you're like, well, this sucks. So we were aware of that. Wasn't a lot we could do about it, but we trained to it, to immediately respond to it, which would mean in our case, hit the panic button, the jet button, the jettison button. We called it jet all. Hit jet all, clean everything off the airplane, and now it's just trying to survive for another day. And there were a couple of times Weasels in a storm, not me personally, but cleaned off their jets completely because they were they drove into something that they didn't realize. They didn't know the thread that had been pulled. They didn't know what they had done. And when they kind of walked in to prosecute an attack, and all of a sudden, way more SAMs, way closer than they thought. And there's some pretty impressive audio files out there of guys fighting for their life, and shooting the missiles and trying to get out of there before they got themselves taken out. And we were very fortunate as a community. We only lost one Weasel in storm, and that was it was still a combat loss, but it was a fuel mort where between flying big sandstorms, we were dealing with those a lot during Desert Storm and the season. And the airfields, all the airfields were down to 0-0. And this crew made multiple approaches back. We were at Sheikiza. We call it Shakey's Pizza, which is an old pizza company in the United States. But they were at Sheikiza and shot multiple approaches until they got down to enough fuel just to get to the control bailout area. Bailed out, and they were fine. They weren't injured. And the airplane just kind of glided and pancaked in the desert, just perfectly pancaked in the desert. The joke was it gave maintenance a whole bunch of new from above the waterline. Maintenance got a bunch of new parts, right away because they can't cannibalize that baby. But anyway, so now, like I said, rabbit hole you. Yeah.
Okay, so let me take you back one more time to something that you've talked about, and then we'll go into Desert Storm and your experiences of it and what it looked like for you. So there's another two-part question because I can't ask a question that's simple with just one part. You've talked already a couple of times about how it was an EWOS aeroplane. Really, it was. You at some points you were the stick actuator. Other times, of course, you were critical to the success or failure of the mission. But for the most part, it was down to the EWO. And when I talk to people who fly crewed aircraft that are specialized, one thing that I always find curious is the attitude of the front seater to what it is the back seater is doing. And I don't mean that in terms of being dismissive of it, but I mean not learning too much about it, because if they're captured, then they may become a security risk, because if they're tortured, they may give out information about what the airplane is doing. So I'll give you an example. BC Thomas is a friend of mine who flew the SR-71, said to me he never really got involved in what the Rio was doing. It wasn't the Rio, the RSO, what the RSO was doing. Yeah. So he didn't really sort of get into the books around the defensive equipment or the sensors. He knew what they were doing, but he didn't really know the ins and outs of it, and he deliberately didn't go and find out about that stuff because he was concerned if he did get shot down and captured, he would be a risk. Did you have a similar approach to that, or were you in the books and trying to understand everything you could about what the aeroplane was capable of doing and how it did it? Did you take a more pragmatic approach where it wasn't just, that wouldn't have been a productive use of your time? It would be better for you to just learn more about the threats. What was your approach to the specialized equipment and capabilities of the airplane?
Well, I took my cue when I was a young guy. So I'm going to take this way back real quick. As a lieutenant, the very beginning, not the beginning, but when they first introduced the F-4 into the Vietnam War, there were no WISOs, or there were a very limited number of people who were, weapon systems officers, navigators, and very, very few, because it's a new airframe, it's a new everything. So it was a pilot in the front and a pilot in the back. The pilot in the back was pilot systems operator. He was they call him Pizzo. And, so you had to know the jet, Now, granted, that was just a straight F-4, but in that back seat, there was a lot of stuff going on to include work on the radar. Again, if you had a really good WISO who could work that radar like a wild man, then you were having a great day. And then the opposite being true. And then, so, when I first got to the F-4 as a young guy, a lot of the, that Vietnam era, lieutenant colonels and majors, especially the pilots, were hard over about, you need to know the airplane in and out and know what the hell the guy in the back is doing too. Then as you become an instructor and jump to the back seat, you have to be able to do all the functions a WISO could do anyway. So we as a young, they used to put us young guys in the back seat of F-4Es and fly us around low altitude and beat the hell out of us with the airplane. But they put us back there to, to be, not to be WISOs or PIZOs, but to be familiar with what's going on back there and the environment back there. Because if you're bouncing your WISO off the canopy all the time with real ratchety turns and being aggressive with the airplane, you're hurting the crew. And you're getting a really bad rep because no one's going to want to fly with you. But I kind of took my cue from that, from the more senior guys. They're like, look, you got to know this stuff. So, combination, not only knowing the threats and also knowing the ordnance, was to know what was going on back there. Which also, when you were in that community, you looked for pilots that did that because they were the ones you were naturally going to progress to flight leads, whether they were, a section of 2 or 4, and also the same people you're going to grow into being instructors, to be instructor pilots. But because an instructor pilot in an F4, in a Weasel or not, you need to be able to work with the guys in the front, so you're riding in the back. You also need to be able to fly with baby Wizzos or Ewos in the pit and walk them through if they're having a problem back there, can't sort through something. You have to be able to walk them through that as well. And so you wound up, at least in our case, our community, both just the straight E's and the G's, we spent a lot of time learning that back seat back there. I didn't enjoy flying in the G model in the pit, even though I did, because you couldn't see out the front. There, the panels were completely inclusive. You couldn't see anything except 10 to 2. So landing that airplane was kind of sporty at times. Radar altimeter came in really handy too. But
you landed it from the back?
Yeah, you had to be able to land it from the back if you were an instructor.
Wow. So normally, something like an F-15 or T-38, I guess, you if you're landing from the back, you kind of use the periphery to see where the runway threat, don't you?
Yep.
On the F4, don't you have big intake ramps up here?
You do. Yeah, you lose a lot of down, and you wind up when you do pick up on the other, the bigger visuals. I lazy or not, I wasn't lazy, but I would fly if we had an ILS. I'd line up with the ILS, and even if it was a visual approach, and then turn the plane with rudder to look sideways on either side. And then in game, you start to pick up the runway environment. You can you roll out, and it's an F4. So from the pit, I never tried to squeak one on from the pit. I just wanted to land. So I would like an F4, like a carrier plane, or even our E's and G's, we had the same gear. We just prong it on, and as long as you were, in my book, plus or minus 20 feet of the center line, in a G from the back seat, I was happy with that and calling that a great day. And we had to, as an instructor, you'd have to do them periodically. We knew to land the jet from the back, but it was sporty. It was very sporty. E models, you could see off, a little bit to the right, all to the left. You could look over a guy's shoulder. You're still at an angle of attack, but you can still see the runway. Way easier than a G. But it was kind of a sporty jet to fly that way.
So returning to the question and then looking at you being in the back seat, those 3 displays, could you make sense then of what was on there? I mean, there's one that's a PPI display that's just numbers and numerals and stuff, isn't it? So I guess that's easy. But the little ones with the frequencies and all that kind of stuff, could you interpret that?
We would get in the sim all the time, and we knew what it was. I'm not telling you that I could have gone out and been an EWO, without going through a core, going back to the 562nd and getting full up again. But and then again, I knew what he was doing and I knew what he was looking at. And the other thing that's different, it was called the APR-47, the APR-38, then the APR-47. The big difference between those systems and the current day systems is we could hear raw audio. The jet would process it and display something to you, but sometimes somebody, Sam might be operating outside of a training mode or what we knew to be a wartime mode, and you would hear the audio, but then the system would classify it as unknown. But all of our EWOs were trained. I mean, they used to train them with sound. No kidding, they would have audio tests when they go to EWO school. You had to know what an SA2 sounded like, both in acquisition and track, all of them, acquisition and track all the way around. And they could tell you rattlesnakes, they had different terms for it. And as a front seater, you got used to that. Because you hear the same audio they heard. So you would know, you'd hear the certain rating, certain beeps and squeaks. I used to call it R2D2. And you would kind of know what they were working already or what was looking at you. And if an unknown came up, because one of the things that I know about the G model is, so we had our receiver group for the EWO. We still had the defensive scope, and I'm drawing a blank on the raw gear number at the moment. But we had our own defensive raw gear. We had a repeater display. Sorry, repeater display here. I could see everything he could see in the back ranged out on my scope up here for defensive reasons. And the E model didn't have that, so you had to play it differently. But I could see what he was working, and sometimes you'd see an unknown, and you're listening with him as well. But they were miles ahead of you. I mean, they knew exactly what it was instantly, and you're still going, "That sounds like A," and they're yelling, "It's a whatever." So I did my best to be useful in the jet that way. and learn what was going on in the pit. And I said, you look for guys like that, that you would move them up to be instructors, pretty quickly if you saw that they have the skills and the desire to be more than just a stick actuator. Then, yeah, it didn't mean you had to do that. And I knew a couple of guys in my career flying in Weasel squadrons where the guy was in a straight E driver, and he, which you could fly the G with a local checkout. But yeah, just, didn't really know a lot about the back seat or the G, and sometimes you get guys that just like, well, I don't need to know that. I'm not a Weasel guy. I'm an E guy. And you're like, well, you are kind of a Weasel guy because you're in a Weasel squadron. But yeah, there wasn't that many guys that did that. There were a few that were kind of that. And as you might guess, they progressed accordingly.
Yeah.
You get to be an E guy. That's great. You're an E guy. You're in a G squadron. So what does that mean? It means you're going to be permanent SACO is what it means. But no.
Tell us a bit about then preparing mentally for going to combat then. So it was interesting to hear you say 20 minutes ago that when you were in the Philippines, they called you up and told you, get ready to deploy because they were expecting those Weasel losses to be high. How does it feel? And what do you sort of do with those feelings to know that you're being lined up to go and potentially replace a bunch of people who are going to get shot down?
Well, in our squadron, if it had been if the squadron commander had said, okay, we're all going to go over here into the squadron bar, and whichever 6 pilots and 6 EWOs, make it to me in the next half hour can go, there'd be a lot of blood on the floor. We wanted to do it. We trained to do it, and we understood. You understood. Even in Weasel training, they spent a lot of time talking about the Vietnam stats and the survivability and things like that. They wanted you to understand fully what you were getting yourself into. Now, it wasn't like you didn't get a vote, you got assigned to the Weasel, but we as a community knew that our training would either save us or you would sometimes the odds would just be against you. It just wasn't anything you could do about it. I did. We're all human. I saw, some guys weaseling who might weasel a few miles further away, to give them more reaction or, I don't want to call it, or making them, I guess, you could do some survivability. Then you had, ridiculous folks like myself who felt like I needed to be in closer to make them want to shoot at us so that we could, get our missiles to them, swap shots, if you will, and be survivable and trained for that level of intensity or aggressiveness. And then when we flew as crews, whoever was leading that day kind of ran the fight. If I was leading, we'd be moving in a little closer to keep them interested and keep them on us versus on the strikers versus other guys who may just be, I'm not talking a great distance, but I'd be a few more miles outside the, pushing the outer range of the threat ring. Be more uncomfortable doing that themselves there. And honestly, none of us ever thought differently of anybody else's technique. And nor would you. That was, if you're leading, you're leading. We trained, my big thing was I didn't want to fail. And that was the kind of the theme amongst all the people I used to fly with. Letting down your in this case, my EWO, letting down my teammates, my crews, was in many ways a worse fate than anything else you could do. Not doing your job and then they get shot down would probably be, I think, the worst feeling in the world to survive that. Up there with a lot of other things, but a really, really bad way to go. So training wise, you trained hard, and honestly, the training gave you, I call it a Superman complex, because you're sure it won't be you. It might be one of the other guys in the formation, but they won't get you. Just kind of had to go with it. Did we think about it? Absolutely. And until the night I got shot at, which I'll talk about later, actually got shot at by a couple of SAM sites. Never really didn't do anything at that point that caused my adrenaline to peak, if you will, and then crash once I got back to the tanker. And then the drive home is the worst, because now the what if monster starts, talking in your ear. But when we trained, when we knew we were the 6 crews that were selected to go, immediately our squadron leadership, Great Americans, immediately just crewed us to our EWOs, and then inner formations paired us up. So we always flew with the same 2 ship, the same EWOs, everybody. And we trained together like that for probably 2 or 3 months, to include Coke Thunders, which is a PACAV version of Red Flag, obviously. We even flew a bunch of those just as a 2 ships, 4 ships, and a 6 ship. And we were a solid element within that. So we trained together like that for months before we ever deployed, knowing that was going to be, that was going to save us, and at least save us, but make us, sharpening your knife, getting it ready to go. So the training, let's say the training offset a lot of the, I'm going to call it fear. Your muscle memory, you're confident in your abilities, and there was nothing you could do beyond that. And if it was just your day to roll snake eyes, you really hoped it never would happen. But from my personal perspective, once we got there, I just didn't think about it. Like I said, there was one night I got a chance to think about it pretty hard on the way home. But other than that, you didn't think about it, like a bunch of other fighter jocks out there that, and also my bomber crews who have gone out there and been shot at. Depending on just your personality, and also your belief system. If you feel like you're ready to go and you had to go, then you're going to go. A lot of that played into it as well for some of us as well. So if you felt like you were good to go, and you were going to, you would make it to Valhalla one way or the other, then that's also part of it as well. I don't know how big a part of that is with each individual personal, but for me it was. So going into it, I knew what it could be. All of us said our goodbyes to our families, hoping it would not be the last time we saw them when we left the Philippines. But we knew they hadn't lost any jets yet. We also knew the ground offensive hadn't started. So when we deployed from the Philippines, so we were, there was. I'm not going to say the base ops. When we were base ops, ready to get on the airplane, was a happy high five kind of environment. Very solemn environment. It was. We were getting to do what we wanted to do, what we trained to do, and what we begged to go do. So we were doing that. Now our families were having to deal with they're going to war kind of thing. So it was very interesting. That's kind of. You asked me. You asked me what time it was, and I told you how to build Big Ben. That's if Spike didn't warn you, then I'm sorry.
Yes, Spike introduced us for everybody's listening. So thanks for nothing, Spike. This is exactly what this channel's about. It's a long format. You tell your story, and we listen. So, okay, when did you get there then? When did you get into theatre?
I think, I go back and look at my notes. We showed up like on day 7 or day 8.
Okay. So it started on the 17th of January. So that would have been mid 23rd or 24th or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what, and what was the brief? You were going to be operating, so you've got some weasels already there doing the weaseling mission. Are you going to split the AOR and you're going to do some, they're going to do others? Are you going to combine? How are you going to integrate into the force?
Yeah, so we showed up and we knew when we left the PI that we were going to be attached to the 81st Attack Fighter Squadron, which is the same squadron that Spike was in. And we were told we'd be attached to those guys. So that's all we knew going in. So when we showed up, got off the plane in Bahrain, and first thing you see is these 2 tornadoes sitting on the ramp, just chewed to hell. They'd been probably some of the jets that had flown over Kuwait in the first couple of days, torn up. And so that was like, oh, this is great. But they bussed us down to the base, and as soon as we got our bags off, there was a rep from the 81st grabbed us, said, "Hey, you guys come with us." And I walked in, met the ops officer, and and he's like, "Hey, welcome aboard." And he showed us, just started walking us through some stuff, and At the end of our conversation, he goes, and by the way, we've been thinking about this. He goes, look, I know you guys are PACAF weasels, you're night weasels, and also you got your own squadron standards of how you weasel, because every squadron was a little different. We had a baseline within the community, and then every squadron was just a little different, flavor-wise. He said, so we're going to give you at least one AOR FAM ride with our flight leads or instructors. So each of you will fly on the wing of one of my guys for at least the first night. We'll try and give you I didn't even call it a milk run, but a Kuwait run kind of thing. We'll put you on a Kuwait line, and you guys can go up and get your local area, we call it local area FAM. He goes, I can't get you a day sortie. You're going to have your first landing here will be at night. He goes, but I'm pretty sure you're fine with it. And he goes, but then once we've done that, we're going to put you back together as a flight. And you're going to take taskings right off the scheduling board, but we're always going to pair you together with yourselves. So you can use your own squadron standards. I know you guys have already been trained together. I'm not going to bust you up and cause problems there. We're going to keep you guys united as an element. And that was probably one of the smartest things I've ever seen. And it was a leadership stroke of brilliance, because we were a little concerned that we might have to learn some new stuff right away, which can maybe cause confusion. As soon as he told us that, they called us E-flight, Echo flight, because you usually have, at least in the Air Force, you ABCD flights in a flying squadron. We were Echo flight, E-flight, but we asked to be called the PEF, the PEF, the Philippine Expeditionary Force, because during our trip there to the AOR, we were stuck in Diego Garcia. That was a stopover. We were stuck in Diego for like 24 or 30 hours, something like that, like a little over a day, because they couldn't get diplomatic clearance to go into some of the countries yet. So we're stuck there. Well, what do you do when you're on an island with B-52 bombers and nothing to do, and you're amped up? You drink. So we drank. We went to the club and drank, and then we wound up wandering into the British base exchange, or PX, or whatever they call it. I don't know what they call it, but it was the British exchange there. And no kidding, walked in, looked at all the kind of cool stuff there, and in this big, like open cage looking thing, like you put dogs or pets in for a store, was just stacked with pith helmets, British pith helmets. I'm making this up. And I can send you a picture later of one of our guys wearing it. Someone did take a picture of all of us with them on. I've never seen it. Never seen it developed, but we kind of took on that whole, hey, this is cool. And then we, because of the alcohol, I believe part of it, we became the Philippine Expeditionary Force. Not unlike, British Expeditionary Forces of back in the day.
Did you not buy the hats? You didn't buy them?
Yeah, we bought them. We bought hats and we all wore them. Okay. Matter of fact, we bought them. Everybody bought one. And we took the rank off of our blue flight caps and pounded it into it so it was there. And then we walked out of the exchange wearing them. So, and now this is a bomber, this is British are there, but there's Air Force bombers there, a lot of bomber people there. And there was going to be some hell to pay for that until they found out we were wild weasels going to the theater. And then no one cared that we wore, we probably could have gone to the club with just a jock strap on and been okay, because once they knew we were weasels, we drank free, which was nice of those guys. And also the leadership just kind of let us, they see your patches, see your helmet, and go, that's out of regs. Go, yes, sir, we know. And you go, all right, and walk off. And so they were cool about it. But that's how we became the Philippine Expeditionary Force. Now back to when meeting the DO, our team lead, Major Mick Elam, great American. Mick just said, hey, instead of E flight, make us PEF flight. We'll be PEF. Just put that on the board. We're PEF. And that's kind of how that kind of played out. And there, I sent you a patch and some other things, from that we came up with. It'll say on the bottom of the patch, last in, first out, because we were the last weasels to show up in theater. We were told when we were deployed there, we'd be there for 6 to 9 months. We brought all of our gear to be there for a long time, MWR pallets, everything. And then when President Bush said, if it's not nailed down or attached to a piece of equipment, get it out of the theater now, when the war was over, they go, well, these guys aren't assigned to these jets, so get them out of here. So we were like, no, wait, we're supposed to stay. And they're like, no, you're leaving. So our patch says last in, first out, because we were like 48 hours later on an airplane flying back to Manila. They wanted us out of theater now. We were
Really?
shocked. I mean,
That quickly?
we were absolutely shocked. And we were also well hated within the community for a while. We just showed up for the war, killed some stuff, and then went home immediately, and the war was over. And we were like, but we were going to stay. No, we did not.
So tell us then about getting ready to go and fly your first combat mission. Then you did. So was your first flight in theatre your milk run or your Kuwaiti run? Was that your first flight?
It was.
So that's your first flight as your first combat mission.
It was. We once we got there, and actually we got a couple of in briefings, and there's a whole thing you go through when you first show up there. Basically, it's a full day of meetings of bosses coming in, welcoming you, telling you the fight and all that, and also I think gauging you. You don't think about that when you're a kid, but they're giving us a hairy eyeball. We're coming in from the Philippines and all that. But once we did about a half day of meetings actually, then we went over to the mission planning tent room building. It was a tent, and started building locally like you would, building maps and knowing where things are, distances. So you would, because realizing we didn't have onboard systems that would do this for you, like how much gas do I have versus how far can I go kind of thing. You had to have maps with, I had one map that was just for diverts with range rings on them. That was it. So you would know where you were. And based on those range rings, you know about how much gas you needed distances out from those bases to know where you were, where you can make it or not kind of thing. We all did this. All of us did this. So we spent a half day or more prepping that way, figuring out the flow, comm cards, building everything out. And the 81st gave us, seeing eye, flight leads and instructors. They sit down with us and walk us through a lot of stuff they were already seeing, giving us the skinny, trying to beat down our learning curve so we didn't have a really steep learning curve, past that first night. And then, so that preparation was pretty much until we hit crew rest, for the next evening. So we were in there for a long time, prepping for this. And again, just trying to pick the brains of those that had already been flying and shot at and what was really going on up there. And that was it. Once we hit our 12-hour crew rest window, went back to the dorms and got in the rack so we get up in time to go do our thing. There was a little bit of a difference in where we were sleep-wise, time zone-wise. But flight surgeons would, if you asked them for them, they give you the go pills and the no-go pills. Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
Yeah, so uppers and downers, basically. So a couple of us, because you're anxious, you're fired up, we're going to go to war tomorrow night or in 12 hours. So I know I took a no-go pill, to get to sleep the first night because, you're fired up. And I don't know how many other guys in my group did, but I did. And it worked. I fell asleep, got up the next day, felt fine. And then, we rolled in. It was a night sortie. So we rolled in the afternoon, did our prep, and met with our guys who had already been planning with for a day. And we were ready to go. There wasn't much else to do except confirm that our taskings hadn't changed. Or if they had, then kind of rewicker some things, do a briefing, and then step to the jets, and then go to the tanker. That was really kind of it. It was the good news is it was virtually the same as our training. I don't think there were maybe very few things that were different, and that was only because we were deployed in an AOR where there wasn't a lot of the amenities we'd have back home, meaning like chart prep things, stuff like that. Nothing fancy. We weren't fancy in those days, but the good news was everything we did felt the same as if we were in the PI training. Everything was the same. So there's a comfort in that, and also just being able to not have to worry about what we call the admin stuff, the queep, who's going to check in, when are you going to taxi, this is the taxi formations, all of that stuff was the same. And so it allowed us to focus on paying attention to the guy we're flying with, both front and back seat, and then paying attention to what was going on. We're flying up the coast of Saudi Arabia, branching out, and then coming back. So it was that part of it actually was probably the easiest thing we did. because it was just what we knew. It was what we knew to do, and there was a reason that our boss sent instructors in both seats, so that we could be flexible, knew we could get our stuff done correctly, hopefully, and it minimized that spin up time.
So what were you doing then for that first mission or those first couple of missions, and sort of just take us back just one step before you tell us that, and just describe what had happened in those first sort of 7 days of the war before you arrived. Then 5 to 7 days, whatever the period was.
Yeah.
Had they taken out most of the sort of most serious threats? Were there still lots of bad things around still? If that's not a stupid question.
No, not at all.
Were you entering an arena that was much less deadly than it had been 7 days before, or were you just pushing into new areas that were still deadly? What was the picture?
No, that's a good. There was. I don't have the numbers, but I know that when we got there, we were briefed on. And there was ways we had to confirm a kill in those days, since we didn't have pods on the airplane. Not that you could get that close, but the way we would confirm a kill, and this will explain kind of what I'm talking about, is the threat was up. It was seen by at least 2 jets, and simultaneously in the same time frame, and then missiles were shot and then timed out. And you're looking at 2 different jets receiver groups. If everything kind of lined up more or less timing wise, because again there was no GPS constellation either, so timing was based on hacking your watch. Then we would call that a hit or a kill. Now, whether it really was in reality, who's to say? But we thought it was a pretty good way of determining a kill, a confirmed kill. Having said that, when we walked in, we were kind of on the first 7 to 10 days was a lot of activity. Guys were coming back with no harms. They're shooting harms all over the place. Sometimes preemptively, most of the time just because there's a threat there. And so we got there on the tail end of that, where the briefing we received was there are still threats, there are still groups of threats out there, but they're being very skittish now about turning on, which is the whole reason of being there, your presence. We call it suppression through presence. We show up and, we very purposefully, all the Weasels ran with beer call signs, Michelob, Bud, whatever. We kept the same class of call signs during the entire war. And a lot of that, some of that reason is, if someone's listening to your radio frequency and they finally figure out and break the code, and I don't know how much Budweiser there was in Iraq at the time, but from that stand, I don't know. But just showing up with that call sign sometimes, you would see threats up as you're going in an area, checking out on the strike brief, and then occasionally everything would just kind of turn off. You're like, well, they know we're here, and we're doing our job because they know we're here. Well, that word got out that that's what was happening. That and the word Magnum, which means I've shot an AGM-88, and those two things combined, you'd have bomber crews or other fighter crews. They would be, coming into the target IP to you get to start their IP to the target run, and would go, Michelob, Magnum, whatever, and start calling out just random stuff on the radios in the clear, to hopefully, that the Iraqis would shut their SAMs down. And honestly, I've heard many stories from guys in years past that, the UOs like in the B-52 would see threats up and would might get on the radio and start making radio calls and then threats kind of like turn off for a little while. Not always off for a long time, but I think eventually they figured out that we weren't always there. But I don't know if that really happened or not. But no, so by the time we did all this, and we knew Kuwait still had threats, and we were escorting. I think I have to go back and look at my log, but I want to say we were escorting B-52s. They would. Have you ever heard the term arc light from Vietnam? Yeah, so they would take a formation of 3 B-52s staggered, and this is when we're all dropping gravity bombs in those days. Well, they would drop 500-pounders. Well, they would just kind of carpet bomb the Republican Guard equivalent, for lack of a better description, knowing the troop concentrations, and it looked like popcorn. I mean, from the air. And I'm not taking anything away from it because, the first time I saw it, looking down the ground, and I told Gino, I'm like, dude, those are 500-pound bombs. Can you imagine the hell those guys are going through right now? Enemy, absolutely. But, we're human too. And you're like, man, that's going to suck to live down there for a while. But we're escorting these guys. And one of the things we always said as a Weasel community is don't weasel in the weather. Don't be in the weather. Don't be near clouds because you can't see the SAMs coming at you to visually maneuver. And what do? We show up the first night, and there is clouds from God knows how low to God knows how high. But in our block, completely clouded in. And we briefed it, and the other Weasel guy from the 81st goes, hey, remember that rule we always said? Yeah, it doesn't count anymore. He goes, we're going to weasel wherever we can weasel. And he goes, but we're going to a place where there's maybe not a lot of threats tonight, so we'll see. To show the, we use the word not being a little naive and a lot young. Once we got to the target area, we didn't see SAMs, but we saw AAA. And if we could have seen it in the daytime, I feel like it would have looked just a little bit like what the B-17 guys and the 24 guys saw over here, because we're driving around in clouds that should not have lightning, but it didn't dawn on me that it wasn't lightning, because we're seeing flashes like lightning. And I even say to Gino, this is weird. They don't brief any thunderstorms type thing. And he's like, yeah, it is weird. We're in agreement. We're in agreement that it's lightning. Yeah, we didn't know what it was till we got home, and I mentioned to the flight lead and debrief. I go, oh, that was pretty interesting. I go, never weaseled in the weather, and I never weaseled near thunderstorms. And he's like, thunderstorms? I go, there's a lot of lightning out there. He goes, dude, that was AAA. And it was pretty much at our altitude. I mean, it was, and I was like, oh crap. Not only are you embarrassed, and you can have that little shudder like, damn, they weren't like on top of us, but they were in our area. And we didn't see any threats that night, just except being shot at by AAA. There were no SAM threats. The bombers dropped their bombs and left. But it was a good orientation. And of course, that was a big laugh later. Almost picked up a new call sign, lightning, thunder, or something less dubious, or more dubious. But yeah, no. So and we drove around for, depending on the mission. If you got up closer to Baghdad, there were still threats. There were threats around the airfields in Iraq, and then down in Kuwait they had a couple of SAMs too, trying to protect them down there in Kuwait. But mostly we saw the SAMs, especially the Strat SAMs, up near the airfields like Basra and places like that, where they kept them alive. They moved them around a lot on the airfield. I'll just leave it at that. They were more survivable. Their learning curve was there. And at some point, I don't know when it was, and I would, someday love to talk to somebody on the Iraqi side that knew the answer to this question. But somewhere in here, they shifted from being a defensive element to their country to being more survivable. And so there would be nights where, you go to, a part of Iraq or wherever, and there wouldn't be a damn thing, not a single threat, not even early warning radar, nothing. And you're like, well, that was fun. And then sometimes you would show up and there's an early warning radar, and pop, here's some SAMs, and now you get to do your business.
Tell me about that then. Tell me about those missions. Or you referenced one where you got shot at and then you had time to reflect on it afterwards. Isn't it now a good time to talk about that? Or is...
I'll tell you what, I'll do it in order. I think it was maybe our third or fourth mission. We had a long, anytime you're going to Baghdad, it was going to be a long day. If we're going to Kuwait, you may carry 2 or 4 arms and not have to use the wing tanks, the 370 drop tanks on the wings. So you carry 4 arms. We call it Weasel Police. You drive around in 2 ships with 8 harms amongst you, and you suppress the country of Kuwait with 2 weasels. Not really, but that was kind of the joke. Those were typically kind of boring missions, but that was okay. I mean, boring could be interesting. But anytime we started going out west, and out west, we were supporting a strike package going into. We used to get Altacadum. We used to call it Altacadum from an old TV show, but Altacadum, and it was I don't know, a bunch of jets, 111s, whatever, striking there, and it was our job, to knock down the threats. And there were threats up that night, quite a few. Um, Interestingly, there weren't any exactly co-located with that airfield, but they were in that area. So that's what we weaseled against. And we were, again, weaseling as separate airplanes in the same area, altitude conflicted. And the two things that was interflight we were supposed to do. One, when you make the Magnum call, or don't forget to make the Magnum call, because at night, these things are as bright as the sun almost, it feels like. And you wanted the other guy to know, that there's a missile, And the other thing was don't shoot from the back of this cap. So if I'm, moving forward toward the threat, and you turn cold, I'm still hot, that's fine. You shoot, I never see your missile. But if we're both hot, the rule was the guy trailing would not shoot through the leader. That was a very bad thing. And so that night, the guy leading that night, I'm trying to think. Yeah, he shot a harm over us, through us, and didn't say Magnum on the radio, so that was very sporty. The fact that we still had all of our crap, I didn't jettison stuff on our jet, was just because I hesitated, because there weren't any threats back there that I knew of. Then I get a late sorry, Magnum sorry call, which that was scary. And then so then we weaseled some more. Well, in the confusion of radio calls on the strike frequency and not knowing that all the strikers were off target and some other things, there was whatever the call sign or the word of the day was, meaning we're all going home now. And did not hear that. And we went back and listened to our tapes. We never heard it. And so we're out there, just me and Gino, weaseling, doing our weasel thing. And the threats go down, and then they're gone, and we're getting ready to leave. And then the threats came back up again. So actually, we turned hot, and we call engaging, and it was an SA-2. And then Gino got excited and shot the arm before he let me know he was going to shoot it. So, the arm goes racing off the rails with an oops and a Magnum call. And we call Magnum, and the other airplane, the other lead goes, confirm you Magnum, and we're like, affirmative. He's like, where are you? I'm like, dude, we're bullseye, blah, 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 off the target. We're weaseling. We're right there on top of the threats. And he's like, go, we call go Yankee, or area attack, and we could range off each other, with the frequencies. And he goes, go Yankee, and so I'm cold, and I go Yankee, and he's like 80 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah, we found out later we were the only Allied airplane, within range of the threats. Yeah, we were it. That's why they came up and were looking at us, because they're wondering what these crazy guys are doing or whatever. But we were the reason we got our kill that night was, the threats. They stayed up because they couldn't believe there's like just one airplane up there just hanging out. And I'm sure that they were very surprised they got hit by a harm, because why would you think that was a weasel? So that was our first kill that night. And then it was glorious, of course. You go home, you almost hurt yourself going back to the tanker by patting yourself on the back so many times. But yeah, it was a really straightforward thing. They were radiating on us. They weren't locking us per se. They weren't shooting at us. You could tell they were trying to figure out what we were doing and why we were there. And they stayed on the air way too long doing that. And we whacked them, and got a kill. And then came home and high-fived everybody. Now we were, blooded weasels, and that was a good thing. As a matter of fact, of note, all 6 crews that went to the Philippines, came to the Philippines, we all got kills at one time or another during storm. So everybody went on with some kind of SAM on their record. But so that was kind of a real busy night, exciting night. And then off and on, it was real patchy after that on whether the threats were up or down. And at one point, I think we're about 2 weeks into this, maybe 3 weeks into this. And it was where it kind of went, even Intel said, we think they're completely defensive now, in the sense of they're husbanding their stores. They're going to try to ride out the conflict and still have threat systems on the other side of it. Because no one intended to invade Iraq at that point. Everybody knew that. So they kind of went, well, we haven't seen any threats like in 24, 40 hours, whatever it was. And they go, so just, be aware we don't really see anything out there. So that was really a horrible thing to tell guys who were already, feeling pretty good about themselves. At least in my cockpit, I got a little complacent. I mean, just to be absolutely honest, was a little complacent. Like, how can you be complacent with SAMs? I don't know, but I found myself there. We were escorting B-52s that night, and again, just to bomb the Republican Guard. And we knew, based on the tornado losses and the damaged B-52s and things like that, that if we weren't on station, they would go to their dump targets, which were typically, I don't even know. Just they weren't going to their primary targets; they go to their dump targets, get rid of their bombs, and go home. So there was a little pressure there to make sure you were on site and you were weaseling and call in, they check in, let you know you're there. You already pre-swept the area with and before they got there. Tried to stir up any trouble if there was trouble there, so we would know before they showed up. And this night, coming off the tanker, my receiver group was not working right. It was having some issues, and my backseater very astutely said, hey, we probably shouldn't go north, with a bad receiver group. And, the thing I said about how, crew coordination is key and, and everything. Well, yeah, it is until you don't use it. And I didn't. I made the call, because if I didn't go, my women couldn't go. That meant those guys wouldn't go to their targets. So I'm like, look, and I even said, we haven't seen any threats in days. Intel just briefed us they're not coming up and shooting at anything. We'll just drive up there, let my my other guy Griff, my buddy Griff, and Sluggo, the other guy, interject. We'll let them lead, and then we'll just trail them around, and then we'll leave when they leave, and we'll call it good. Gino was against that. Right? He voted no. I voted yes. I made the statement I would eat later several times. I said I get 51% of the vote because I'm the pilot. Now that's exactly wrong. Dumbest thing I could have done or said. And honestly, if we had stayed on the tanker and gone home, it wouldn't have changed the war at all. It wouldn't have changed anything. But that's not the mindset you're in. You're in that go mode. So we went north with a really sketchy receiver group. And I let Griff lead us in there, and we're just droning along. And then eventually the receiver group just all but died. We could tell there was things up, but we couldn't tell where it was. You could hear things. And then at one point, my Gino goes, my pitter goes, he goes, our jamming pods are. And we were carrying ALQ-131 pods. And he goes, our jamming pods on. And I, being the most astute individual in the airplane at that moment, went, Gino, we're over Iraq, it should be on. And his response was, no, you, and there's a couple expletives in there. He goes, it's on auto and it's jamming. And as we're saying this, and I'm coming to the realization of what he's saying, and my brain cells are trying to work. The other Weasel, Griff and Sluggo, they go Magnum, Magnum SA2, or whether we're code for SA2, bearing and range. And then Sluggo comes up and goes, and he's launching, and it's not on us. And that kind of confirmed that they picked the trailer in the formation. And so they launched two arms into two different SAM sites. We were being radiated apparently by two different SAM sites, maybe three, based on what we heard later. And about the time all this is going on and my little pea brain is, running to catch up to what's happening, Gino, who now is looking toward the threat area because he doesn't have anything else to do, goes, he goes, Sam's coming off the ground. That's what he and I would always say to each other. And he goes, I've got two Sams coming off the ground at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, where I'd have to go back and listen to the tape, but it was, and I'm like, okay, it's on us. We know it's on us now. So So I reached down to punch everything off the airplane. And the jet had different configurations of how you could jettison just tanks or everything. Well, I had mine configured for tanks and then missiles. Well, tanks and then all. And I thought I hit jet all to get rid of everything on the jet. We found out later on the way onto the tanker, I still have my arms because I hit jet one, and all I did was clean the tanks off the airplane. So we were not as maneuverable as we could have been, but in those harms, by the way, we couldn't use them for anything. So I began maneuvering the jet like we trained in the Philippines for 9 defensive maneuvers, and went into my spiel with flying the jet into maneuvers. And then Gino, to his credit, even with all the rocking and rolling and pulling the nose down and getting everything ready for our maneuvers, he kept track of the 2 SAMs that were coming at us. And we had always trained for him to call the pull, like when you think they're really flying in game. Now at night you have no depth perception, so it's really a guessing game. And he called the pull, so I was maneuvering the jet based on his information from the back. And one SAM went off, moderately close underneath the plane, shook the plane violently, overpressure. But we didn't know it was just overpressure at the time. Overpressure knocked the hell out of the plane. I shook us up pretty good, and I'm continuing to maneuver, and I lost the generator. One of the generators fell offline. Actually, both generators fell offline. Maneuver the plane. Got one generator back online while another set of missiles are coming our way. Maneuvered again for his pull call, and this one went off further away from us. We saw the flash under the plane, and just felt like turbulence, but it wasn't what we felt the first time. So the jamming pod had increased our miss distance in maneuvering, to where we survived the engagement. And then the Weasel, the other Weasel, called out, timed out his shots and called them. And at about that time, we're like, okay, it seems like everything's okay for the moment. But in the meantime, I had been going downhill because we had to keep energy on the airplane. And now we're in full blower, and I don't know where we were, at around 7,000 or 8,000 feet AGL low over Iraq. And every bad guy that wanted to take out their frustrations on an airplane, we're shooting at the afterburner point, apparently, because the sky starts to get a little busy with tracers and not like horrific, but so out of burner, and we're climbing away now. It's like we got to go home and let the other Weasel know we may have taken damage. We don't know. And got back to the tanker about just before sunrise. Put fuel on the both jets, and of course I'm low on gas because I don't have my tanks. And Griff's underneath looking at the belly of our plane, and he says, "Well, you've got fluid. You've got fluid on the bottom of your plane. I can't tell where it's coming from, but you've got fluid streaming on the bottom of your plane." And that kind of made sense to us because we lost both generators, and those were what we call constant speed drive units. They work off of, oil, fluid. So if a generator had been damaged or something, it would have leaked a bunch of fluid on the airplane, which would explain why I only had one generator and a 2 coming home. So we're like, well, okay, we don't see any holes, but we're going to go with it. And it was after that, and while Griff was getting his gas, that all that adrenaline and everything else that just happened for the last 45 minutes to an hour, because even getting back to the tanker, you're so ready to, like, oh crap, that was a really bad idea, and oh crap, we're, whatever. So you're keyed up until you go feet friendly, over Saudi Arabia, put gas on the jet, and now everything is fine. The motors are fine. Everything's fine. We decided to drive home, just to fly home. So we did. And when we landed, we were still dripping a little bit of fluid, but there were no holes in the jet after we got out and looked at it. We found out that the jamming pod, the ALQ-131, has a cooling system in it. Its own coolant system, its own coolant. And probably the first shock wave broke a bunch of internal components on the pod. And the coolant system was pumping coolant overboard under the belly of the airplane. Again, we didn't know that until maintenance told us later. But interestingly, I was told by the Spangdahlem maintenance guys because I pull up and I've got no tanks and 2 harms, which is not what they're used to seeing. So they're like, why do you still have the harms? We know why you wouldn't have tanks. Why do you still have harms? And they're like, it's called buffoonery. That's what it was. It was buffoonery. I have to say, I saved the American taxpayer the money of 2 arms, but it was just pure buffoonery in the heat of the moment. And and my buddy Gino, we had a conversation after we got on the ground, and I was on receive and he was on broadcast, and everything he said was exactly true. And bad decision making, complacency. He used different words, a lot more descriptive adjectives, but that's what it really boiled down to. And a promise that I would never do that to him again. And I promised him that, and never did do that to him again. But yeah, so that night I got shot at was, I think we would have been shot at anyway because it didn't change our routing, it didn't change our timing or anything. It just changed the fact that I couldn't see anything or defend myself. So we would have still seen the same threats. We found out later that intelligence said that the Iraqi air defense minister or whatever, I guess, put out the word: if you're not shooting, we're going to be shooting. We're going to give you. So if you're not, your evaluation will probably be a 9mm or AK-47 round. So they weren't just up in where we were. They were up all over the country. So all the SAMs had been down for a while. All of a sudden they were back up, and a bunch of the guys from Spang and George got an additional number of kills those nights. They did it for like 2 nights or 3 nights in a row, and even in the day they were coming up so as well. So it was like their last big push to defend the great skies of Iraq and all that, and we punished them for it as a community. So after that though, the only other thing that I called a significant mission was we did Gino and I did shoot an SA-3. We were part of a package, and the other jet had just gone cold. We were hot. The 3 pops up right off our nose, and they weren't looking at us. They were just up, like they didn't know we were there. I don't know what happened, but they were there and we were here. And Gino's yelling "Magnum, Magnum," and missile comes off, and we schwacked this thing. When the missile drove off the plane, instead of doing its normal climb and go, it just kind of went straight off the nose and went on. And I turn away, and I can't say I saw anything blow up per se. There was something happened on the ground, probably did blow up, and then the sight went down. The issue wound up being later that the other Weasel never saw the 3 come up. So it happened so fast, and he just never saw it. And so we got like a probable, on a 3, not a confirmed. No big deal. I mean, I still get my retirement pay from the Air Force regardless of, probable versus confirmed. I'm still good. But it happened super fast. Then one of my flight mates, great dude, wound up being a Thunderbird, Malf. He, believe it was him, got a shot on a 6 right off his nose, like a mid-range shot where it popped up on right underneath their nose. Probably, it could have been a sand bush. We'll never know. But immediately, him and his pitter just jumped on it, unleashed the harm mid-range. And he rolled up and watched this thing fly into the sight. That's how close they were, daytime. So, a couple of guys got to clear leather from the hip, and they swapped shots with a SAM. Normally that wouldn't have been very survivable, but and again they weren't locked up on the Weasel. They just turned on radiated, and they took it right in the teeth. Because at some point in there, like you said, it was like 2 or 3 days where they were like they were trying to fight back again with what they had left. And this is also the same year when they were flying their MiGs and they're all flying their jets over to Iran. Kind of that whole, last minute stand, or let's take our jets over here and, live to fight another day, or just give them to the Iranians and call it good. Um, who knows? But that was kind of it. I mean, there were a lot of days like war is, where it's hours and hours of boredom, interlaced with seconds of terror, and in full on game. And we toward the end there, we found ourselves just wandering around looking for a fight, and there wasn't a fight to be had toward the end. Then after a ceasefire was declared while they were trying to find a flag officer, an Iraqi general, to actually sign, something to declare, surrender. We put 4 Weasels up on a tanker up over Kuwait, near Kuwait, and then, just south of Kuwait on a tanker. And then we'd have a 4-ship on alert. So we'd had, and then because there was no, just you don't want to keep the entire Weasel fleet, and plus the jets had just a ton of hours on them. The crews had tons of hours on them. One of the reasons they brought us into theater, the big reason they brought us in theater, was they figured out right away that we weren't flying these scripted 4 to 6 hour missions. Those guys on the first leading edge, Spike and all those guys, they were flying 7, 8, 9 hour missions. Because if you showed up to the tanker and you still had harms on your jet, then you got sent to a lat long to support a strike group. That did it. So you would stay airborne until you're out of harms, or just physically need to go home because damn, you've been up for a long time. And then you would land, and then there wasn't, because of the longer duration sorties, that cut into your next day's crew rest. And you had guys that they waived crew rest completely, which is 12 hours, completely waived it, because you had guys that would land and be back airborne in less than 12 hours because they just didn't have the manning in some cases. So they brought us in to really help plus that up and relieve those guys in the 81st. The 562nd, the guys in the picture behind you, they sent crews. I don't remember how many crews, but they sent crews to supplement the 561st, which was the squadron from George. They sent crews to supplement them as well for the exact same reason. I just don't know how many they sent, but they did send crews in theater for the same reason. And even after we were there, we were still flying. I think my longest mission was 8 or 8.5 hours. It was, going over to the west side of Iraq, H2, H3 airfield complex, weaseling over there for a bunch of strikers. And just to drive over there was a couple hours, hitting multiple tankers and being drugged by tankers. Till you get there, weasel for an hour, forever how long you weasel, and get back and get drugged back across Saudi Arabia again behind tankers. So we were airborne, some wicked that night, some wicked time, because our strikers were late, and of course we're already in the air, because we're taking off those many hours ahead of time. Strikers were late, and not a big deal. We just waited for them. But yeah, that was the longest one we had, and that was a go pill kind of night for everybody in the formation, because we were just dragging by. So go pills were prescribed, they were legal, and they were in our case, very well monitored by our flight surgeons. And then they didn't hand them to you and go and have a party. You signed them out, and then you signed them back in. At least we did, these little packets. And they would not give you a no-go pill until you landed. So you couldn't have both. So you wouldn't wouldn't overpilot the thing and, do that. So, those were the nights you didn't need a no-go pill. And we flew, I want to say our first run, we flew 7 or 8 nights straight, just straight. And then we got a down day, which was cut short. All I remember is it was cut short for reasons I don't remember, because we were supposed to be off for 24 hours and we weren't. They were back in the fray. And then we ran another couple, almost another week, and without a break. And then as the thing started to kind of, the threat kind of started, we felt like it was going down. They started putting fewer jets on the schedule, or being more deliberate, I'll say, about putting jets on the schedule, in that they were giving crews some time because they were just exhausted. And by the time we were in our second week, we were kind of exhausted as well. I mean, yeah, I mean, I took a no-go pill to offset a go pill. Well, that's a different story. And um, yeah, you know, and the next thing I know, I'm back in the dorms, and next thing I know, my Gino, my pitter's shaking me. I'm going, dude, wake up! You know, we got a call. We need to go be over to the squadron in like an hour. And I'm waking up, and I'm what? He's like, you need to get up. You need to wake up. And I wake up, and I've got one boot off, one boot on, still in my flight suit, and I'm sprawled across my bunk, and I had probably the worst crick in my neck I've ever had, but I was just completely unconscious of the world. And apparently, I've never seen it. But one of my buddies being a bro, as opposed to waking you up and going, dude, you know, wake up and lay down. Just took pictures, you know, you know. But that was kind of on the Weasel side. You know, our missions were, you know, we had ATO lines, we had taskings, but you never really knew if you're going to be coming home right after that or not. So we started carrying more water, more, you know, small, we'll call them Scooby snacks, with you. I used to take energy, you know, little energy strips, you know, food wise, like power bars or something like that. Just to have something in the cockpit to keep your blood sugar up, because you could be up there for a long time. And so, yeah, that was kind of just kind of another aspect to it. And also, you know, you talk to the flight surgeons. I've got some great friends who were flight surgeons during that storm with us. And a couple of those guys got together and wrote papers on long duration operations. I mean, even though there was, you know, Desert Storm wasn't that long, but the hours we were putting into it, especially on our side as a support element, supporting those strikers, it wound up, you know, really wearing guys out. Yeah, so then after they stopped flying, like I said, we only had, you know, 8 Weasels out of the entire fleet on our end of it. We're, you know, kind of like on call just in case something popped up that, you know, some guy didn't get the message, you know, that we surrendered kind of thing. Yeah, and then no kidding, though, they called the war over, and less than everybody was taking turns setting alert, and we did too. And then once, yeah, we came off of an alert one day and walked in, the ops officer and squadron commander there and go, hey, no, you guys thought you were staying. We're like, yep. So we thought we were going to get moved to permanent quarters, and they went, you need to get your stuff and pack up and, you know, go ahead and pack your pilot will mail it to you, and you need to get the hell out of Dodge. And by the way, there are no military airplanes going to that part of the world right now. He goes, so you guys are authorized to fly commercially back to the Philippines. So we did, and well, we took off out of Manama, Bahrain, and there was probably only 50 people on this entire. I don't remember if it was a 767 then, or if it was not a 67, but it could even have been a 747, because we were trying to just have to think about it. But we were like 50 people on the entire plane, including us. And they moved all, because we're in flight, they moved us all up to first class. Flight attendants were very kind to us. And we drank and ate for free and slept for free up in first class. And until we landed back in the Philippines. And then once we were home for about 6 weeks before we evacuated because of Mount Pinatubo. Might have been 2 months, but it's like 6 weeks. When Mount Pinatubo erupted, and we had to evacuate. Most of us evacuated that way, which is a different podcast and a different story. But we all, you know, all 12 of us made it home, and we all had great stories. We also were able to, speak with some authority on what it's like to get shot at, things like that. You know, and it does help your. I guess it helps your credibility to get shot at. I don't think that's the right term, but having, I mean, as we say, going downtown, you know, there was a lot to be said for that. That was the fact I participated in Desert Storm was one of the reasons I stayed in the Air Force the rest of my career, which lasted out to 22 years. Because just for reasons that aren't important, when I got assigned to the Philippines, my intent was to do my 3 years there, go back to the States, and I'm from Memphis originally, and get a job on with FedEx. I was a bit irritated with the military, didn't want to go to the Philippines, for reasons again not important. And but was going to do my duty for God and country, and then get out. And the fact that I got to participate in Storm and do my job as a weasel, I decided I was just going to stay in and see what adventures lied ahead. Laid ahead, and or light ahead. I don't know. You guys spelled defense with a C, so we can argue, tomato later. But no kidding, man. It was a moment that I think we're all that participate are proud of. I don't, and if I'm missing, if I say this and you go, but I know one, it could be. But I was told at one point toward the end of the war that we had not lost a striker who was Sam when there was a Weasel in the area.
I believe that's true.
Physically in the area. Didn't mean anything get shot by AAA. And there were actually aircraft lost to Sam's. Viper, Strike Eagle, a couple of guys got shot down. But definitely Nelson Tornadoes got shot down by Sam's. But I was told we didn't have Weasels in those areas. They were outside the Weasel area, or the area that Weasels were supporting. So, we're very proud of that. This went very differently than we imagined. Our forefathers, the Weasels from Nam, we stood on their shoulders because they had loss rates, depending on the time period, they'd be 60, 70, 80% loss rates. If you've ever met a wild weasel with a 2-digit number, because we get numbers, a 0 up. And if you ever met a double-digit weasel, most of them are now gone just because of their age. But following the war, then you just met a badass. That's who you met. And actually, I think up to about 300 or 400 was when those guys would go out in a 4-ship and bring one jet home, kind of thing, with SA2s and AAA. So we were anticipating massive loss rates based on what we saw. When we didn't see the loss rates, thank God we didn't have to use attrition replacements, because the plan was we were going to fly 6 jets in to replace jets too. That's why we traveled on a commercial air, because they didn't need the jets. They didn't have the ramp space for the jets. They just needed crews. So very proud of what we did. Within the 12 of us, we've done a pretty good job of keeping in touch. 2 of us have already left this world, for better places. We'll see them again someday. But one was killed in an A-10 crash, and the other one passed away for health reasons. But there's still 10 of us out there kicking around somewhere. We're hoping to get a reunion someday, but we keep saying that and then we don't. But yeah, we were very close at the time, obviously, and kept in touch over the years. And this is when internet wasn't a thing. So, the old Band of Brothers saying, Shakespeare, we're all cited because everyone knows it. But truly, we were very tight after that.
But Spot, just before we wrap up, then let me just ask you one question around the experience you had, and it's really interesting that you are so candid in retelling your failings that night, and the commitment you made to not repeat them, and the fact you didn't. And you did go. I said right at the beginning, I teased that hopefully we'll get you back, and hopefully we will, because you did tell me you flew Iraqi Freedom, which was March 2003. In the 117, I would love to hear about that and hear about comparing and contrasting those two different experiences, sort of all those years apart. But that will be for another day. But I am curious to know, whether it affected you, that momentary lapse, that complacency, because and frankly, if it's not too personal a question, whether or not it haunts you, because you fess up to it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
You can make it small by being honest about it, but does it sit there on your shoulder all these years later?
It did for a while. Honestly, it did for a while. I learned to be an instructor from probably some of the greatest instructors ever. I was not very good at bombing initially. We used to do manual bombing, and I was okay. I had a lieutenant colonel, Jocko Trimble, former POW. spent a month with me, teaching me how to bomb, just him and me at my first squadron. Um, and he was also very honest man. Still is. He's retired now, um, but my early instructors were just bloodily honest sometimes about things they did right and did wrong. And I think that somehow I've always tried to be an honest person, but that kind of imprinted on my DNA especially as a person more than just a pilot, as a person. And since then, I've always been very honest with people as an instructor, um, for both good and bad. Because anybody that thinks they're perfect, you need to really need to rethink that. And this did sit on my shoulders for a long time, in trying to understand why I made the decision. It wasn't necessarily. I think there was a bit of a bravado in there, for sure, but it was also, like I said, a little complacency and overconfidence, and then sprinkle on top a little bravado, and there you have a bad decision. And for the rest of my career, I tried to make sure, hey, I didn't do those kinds of things. I tried to, if I ever felt those feelings again, for lack of a better description, or saw the dominoes starting to line up again like that, to knock it off, just stop what I'm doing or make a different decision. I was determined to learn from it. And when I talk to young aircrew, and it's easy to glamorize, shooting and getting shot at and things like that. You could totally make it Hollywood. And I make sure that when I'm training, I'm still paying it forward at the weapons school. At least I feel like I am. Very honest about the good stuff I did and the bad stuff that went down. My bad decision making. Because just because I train weapons officers now at weapons school. And it doesn't matter when you leave our school with a patch or not, and you're a graduate, like a Top Gun guy and all that. You're still going to go home and make mistakes because you're human. And I tell them, you want your credibility to be solid. You want people to believe what you're saying and take you seriously. When you screw up, you need to fess up. I'm like, sometimes maybe I'm too much of an open book. But anytime I make mistakes, I'm the first guy to call it, first guy to highlight it, first guy to talk about how to fix it. I believe that's probably one of the reasons I got picked up to stand up the F-117 weapons officers course back in the day, initial cadre, was I had some skills, but as an instructor, we may go out to the tanker. I got a guy I'm training on a tanker, and I get on a scope or something, or whatever. First guy to go, okay, what I did, don't do that again. Don't do that, because this is how I made the mistake. So I embrace that, and I still do when I'm teaching and everything else, because again, I only know of one perfect person who's ever walked the earth, and it ain't me. So with that, I've watched instructors try to, I'll say cover up, or gloss over, or look the other way, or, it was momentary deviation. And you can just look around the room and instantly see, the people around who know differently, just go, yeah, whatever. And after that, I just don't know how effective you are as an instructor or even as a leader. And because, I learned a lot, in my years as a fighter pilot, as an officer. And, you've got to be credible in front of the people you're trying to lead. Doesn't mean, you can talk about your warts, that's fine. But, but you're also telling people that I make mistakes, you make mistakes. But I'm still going to hammer you if your mistake was willful. So there's a difference between a mistake and willful misconduct. So yeah, it was on my shoulders for quite a while. Then I just kind of learned to embrace it and move on with. And anytime I tell the story, term I'm going to use, we call it open kimono. I kind of talk about the bad decisions and the good decisions, and there were a lot of positives that night. The positives were I had a crew, the crew that saved us, that you could trust. We were trained together as a two-ship, as a section. We responded that way as a section. A radio call says they're tracking something not on us. Not a normal radio call you hear. Them, very selectively attacking two sites with two missiles versus like one site, two missiles, and the decisions they made as a crew, trained together, saved us too. And then the crew coordination between me and Gino. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't to say that there wasn't a moment of regret up there in the front because they're getting shot at. That moment of regret didn't come until we got back to the tanker because our training kicked in, muscle memory kicked in, and we worked really well together as a crew that night, and we survived my bad decision. So, yeah, no, dude, I appreciate you coming back on that. And one of the things as an instructor is, I'm going to tell you like it is. It may not be pretty, but I'm always going to tell you like it is, and do my dead level best to make sure what I'm telling you is the absolute truth. Again, it goes back to being a leader, and it's hard to pay it forward to a bunch of young people. And majors and senior captains are not young people, but they are to me.
Yeah.
But I'm blessed to be in a place like the weapons school where you've got other instructors and other people there who do the same thing. They have the same way of thinking and work hard to pay it forward so that our current level, our current generation of warfighters that we train at the school have the best chance of doing what we need to do, what our leaders tell us to do as a military organization. But
Spot, yeah. They're lucky to have you, I'm sure.
Oh, thanks, I appreciate it. I hope so. We'll find out someday when I get ready to retire if they. I've always said if you really like me, instead of putting a statue in front of the school, I'll just take a lawn gnome. That's fine, a little lawn gnome. I'm good. I know they miss me. And then the last thing I'll say, because you kind of alluded to some of the stuff. After I left the Philippines via Mount Pinatubo, I spent a little over 2 years at Fort Benning, which is now a different name. I can't remember. No one hates me for that. But I was at Fort Benning as they call it a jump ALO, which I was a air liaison officer with the 75th Ranger Regiment headquarters in Benning, and had a chance to work with special operators as an air liaison officer. And I got to, there's this fighter pilot guy, who the most I had ever led is an 8-shipper, Weasel someplace, and 16 people and all that. Thrown into leading, they call them JTACs now, enlisted terminal air controllers, now joint air controllers, JTACs, leading, I'm going to use the word lead in quotes, because when I showed up there's this fighter pilot walking into a Ranger regiment, and all of my JTACs, almost all of them had some combat experience some way or another with the Rangers. And they themselves were incredible leaders, just themselves. And so it wasn't so much I was leading as I was following their lead to figure out what I should do next as a leader. I saw my Army contemporaries, same age, being in charge of 100 Rangers, 200 Rangers, and it's just that. So I started studying my Army officer contemporaries and listening to them and going to their training and taking to heart everything they were doing and being leaders of people who are already pretty high-end warriors anyway. And then had a knee injury and moved to a non-jumping, a non-ranger. It was a 3rd Brigade 24th ID there at Fort Benning while I was recovering from knee surgery, and stayed there. And then honestly, there's where I learned to be an officer. I mean, a leader and an officer in the truest sense. I'd been a leader and a warrior. Now I'm a leader, warrior, but I'm really a leader now of people. I'm enlisted, which I had never done before, and a bunch of them, very experienced people. And that next year and a half, almost 2 years, that's where I learned to be an officer. And that the rest of my career gave me the ability to lead people other than just a bunch of fighter pilots who themselves, most of them aren't noodles you have to push anyway. Yeah. But and then so I wound up leaving that job, flew the F-15C for about 4.5 years, did Southern Watch, several tours of Southern Watch there. And then also, then I went and did a staff job at the Air Force where I learned the bomber trade. And I was a safety guy, but I learned about bombers, and I was a fighter guy. I didn't know anything about bombers. Learned to respect those people and the things they do with their airplanes. And then from there, was going to go back to a cockpit and was able to fly the jet I'd always wanted to fly after it came out of the closet, the 117. And was volunteered for that, and through some hook and crook, it came together and worked out for me. So wound up going to fly the 117 after it had moved down to Holloman. So so flew the black jet there for 5 years. And again, I'm a pilot at heart. Never wanted to be chief of staff.
Yeah.
Always wanted to be the dude dudettes in the squadron that could plan and lead night one kind of guy. I always wanted to be that person. That's what I strove for my entire career. Yeah, I had a staff tour here and a little tour there. I try to learn from where I'm at and take it forward, learn and move it forward with it. So, you look at a person's path, and I flew 4 kinds of airframes, which, in a military career, if you specialize like that, you're not going to be one of the higher up guys, and that's okay. Guys like me, there's a bunch of iron majors and lieutenant colonels out there that, teach the young people. The lieutenant colonel that spent a month with me to teach me to bomb, that was my example I lived by throughout basically my entire career, and still do hold that up as a retired guy working back in weapons school. So, but yeah, later I look forward to when we can talk later about other things. But unless you have anything else, I just want to thank you for the opportunity, your patience. It took a while for us to get in the same room, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it worked out, and it's been a pleasure going down memory lane.
Well, I would say the pleasure has been ours to listen to it. So, and you're right. It took a little while to get together, but it was definitely worth the wait. So, and you must let us know, or let me know, speaking in the plural because I'm speaking on behalf of the audience, but let me know when you're in a position to talk Iraqi freedom, because I think that would be fascinating too, and the 117 in general. So that's the sensitive topic. You can't talk about that at the moment, but when you're out, hopefully you will be able to. So. All right, well, Spot, I am out of time. Not to say I couldn't carry on listening to you, but the bed and nighttime is taking priority. So thank you so much for joining us on the channel. I look forward to seeing you again whenever that is. And for the moment, thanks a lot for sharing your experiences with us. We appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Spot.